Our next guest is on a mission to bring back civility to our deeply divided country. And it starts with an important conversation. Jillian Youngblood is the CEO of the nonprofit and nonpartisan organization Civic Genius. Jillian, welcome to our show.
Thanks so much for having me.
I think the key component there is that nonpartisanship that's very important. But you are very dedicated to this issue, and you have a very interesting event coming up first. But before we get to that, tell us what Civic Genius is all about.
Yeah, so as you said, Civic Genius is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, and we are dedicated to overcoming political polarization. It's going great, as you can see. So we run a program where people from across the political spectrum come together for an entire day, and they work through coming up with policy solutions to some really tricky public policy issues. So it's incredible to see how people who may not have anything in common politically can really cooperate and collaborate and find consensus on issues where Congress maybe has not found any solutions yet. And, you know, the first part of that is talking, just giving people some time and space where they can talk to each other as humans who are complex and have nuanced views. And that's really what America Talks is all about.
I love that. How did you get involved in doing this? Did the way you grew up kind of influence this togetherness that you seek?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a former Capitol Hill staffer. And although you don't necessarily think of Washington, D.C. as a place where people go to find consensus and solve problems lately, I met so many people during my time in D.C. who were there for the right reasons, who really did want to find solutions to these big problems that we're facing. And that wasn't really a surprise to me because I grew up in a really conservative community in the South. I spent most of my career in New York City and in DC. And it was just always very obvious to me that if these two different worlds could find an opportunity to just talk to each other and understand their other perspectives a little bit better, that we could really get somewhere. And, you know, I always talk about my dad, whose politics are very different than mine. And we used to have these real screaming fights where like we would just go at it. My sister, who is wiser than all of us, would just leave the room. And then after we got through all of this frustration, we would realize we agreed on like 70% of whatever we were talking about.
That is what I have noticed a lot. Is it seems more often than not, and maybe you can attest to this too. It sounds like that's what you're saying, is that people tend to have more in common when it comes to policy than they think they do, right?
Yes, it's so true. And there is a ton of research to back that up. When you're able to get people in an environment where they're actually talking about what the problem is and what specific things we can do to make that problem better, to solve it, it's so different than if our social media avatars are, you know, going at it on Twitter or on Facebook or something. And it's really easy to get locked into your own talking points. And it's easy to forget that you don't know everything about every topic, and that's fine. So having this opportunity to hear other people's lived experiences and perspectives is so powerful and makes you realize, as you said, that people have a lot more in common than they realize.
So if they do have this in common, where does the polarization come from then? Where does it start?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's not total agreement among experts on the answer to that question. I think we can certainly say that social media has had a lot to do with this. So we know that social media algorithms prioritize more extreme content. So we end up hearing from people who are really on the poles of an issue, and we hear less from people who are maybe saying kind of more nuanced, moderate, reasonable things in the middle of those two poles. I think we've seen this for decades, coming from cable news, coming from more partisan media. And then there's just the fact that Americans have really self-sorted into different communities. So we see people actually looking at the way that a community voted in a presidential election when they're deciding where they want to live. And this is something that's been going on for decades. There's a great book about it called The Big Sort. And it just means that you're less likely to run into someone who thinks differently than you at the grocery store or at church or just in your normal everyday life.
I gotta say, it's really fascinating. And speaking of cable news, I don't even watch cable news in the United States anymore because of some of the things that happen and go on. But, you know, most people do recognize that there's this unhealthy division in our country, but nobody's really doing anything about it. So tell me about America Talks and how people can participate.
Yeah, so America Talks is the easiest way to start pushing back on some of this polarization. So whether you just want to talk to someone who thinks differently than you, whether you want to get involved in solving some of these problems and you want to take some kind of political action, America Talks is just an easy door to walk into. So it's online. You can do this from the comfort of your couch. There are two great opportunities to participate coming up. So the first one is tomorrow, Thursday, and that is at 5 p.m. Pacific. If you can't make it on Thursday, you can drop in on Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific, and you'll just join this online room. It's a different platform than Zoom, but works basically the same way. You'll see a live stream where we welcome everybody and kind of explain what the event is about. And then our algorithm, based on some questions that you answered, will put you in a conversation with somebody else who thinks differently than you. And a cool twist this year is it can either be a one-on-one conversation or you can decide you want to be in a small group conversation.
This is fascinating. Thank you so much for talking to us, for sharing it, for dedicating your life to this. We really appreciate it. And America Talks runs this Thursday and Saturday, and you still have time to register. Just text the word TALKS to 206-448-4545, and we'll send you a link. I feel compelled myself to get involved. We all really should try to start this conversation again.